Dolty, I just wanted to start by thanking you. Wanted to introduce the project, and I wanted to ask, when was what was your first job in the steel pipe business? What was the year? What was the company that hired you? Tell me about that.
Yeah, my good friend was here in Houston, Texas, and I was born and raised in South Louisiana, and he got me a job here in Houston. So we got here in October of 1981 with Williams Patterson, which was an OCTG distributor for Nippon Steel through the Japanese trading company Mitsui. And that's how I got here in 81.
Okay. Yeah. 1981 was your start.
Yeah, October 81. And 4 months after I was here was the historical crash of the 80s. So we were supposed to come to Houston for a couple of years and go back home.
And home was?
In New Orleans, right. New Orleans, Louisiana, and we're still here. Been here for, going on almost 40 years. And we raised our 2 daughters and got into the pipe business. And, it's been my life, my blood. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so that first company, say the name again.
Williams Patterson.
Williams Patterson.
Yeah.
And they were a pipe distributor?
Yeah, OCTG, downhole pipe distributor, a very large one, quite honestly. We had 8 locations around the country, and it got my exposure to that business in the oil patch, and also gave me my exposure to Mitsui, the Japanese trading company, because that was our source and our channel.
How did you get that job? What?
My best friend, quite honestly. I was back home. My background has been in the finance business, and I was in industrial finance and thrift for 11 years and got a little burned out and actually went to work for my dad for 3 years in a family business who was a marine towing business. And in all honesty, I just didn't like it. I just hated it. And I remember the day after my 31st birthday, I went in on Monday morning, went to my dad. I gave him a hug and a kiss. I said, "Dad, I love you, but my butt's out of here." And he said, "Boy, what are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know, but this is not what I want to do the rest of my life." And I had a real good friend who was VP of sales for Williams Patterson here in Houston. And he called me up and said, "You ever think about moving?" And I said, "No, I never have, but I will." So he flew me over here. I interviewed and got the job. And so moved our family here, and unknown, total cultural shock. Little town I'm born in Houma, which is about 50 miles south of New Orleans, and come into a big city like Houston. But it's totally changed our life by all means.
You were married to?
Yeah, Cece and I, you know that story. We met when we were 14 years old, went all through high school together, got married right out of high school, and in August we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so her and I have been through it, got here, and our daughters were 6 and 2. And they're 44 and 40. So it's been great. You think back and I can't imagine what my life would be like if I hadn't have made that move. And it's funny how we all interact with them, because if my friend would have not been in Houston, I would have never gotten here. I would have never met you. I would have never met so many relationships in this business. And it's funny how things work. Yeah.
So you got hired as an inside salesman?
No, I actually came as credit manager. Oh. And actually when it crashed for the next 3 years, I mostly lived in bankruptcy courts representing the company, sitting on creditor committees. And that was a culture shock. I spent a lot of time on the road all over because there was bankruptcies going left and right in the early 80s. And in March of 84, we actually shut the company down. And that night, Sid Tashima, who ran Mitsui Tubular Products, called me and wanted me to go to work for him. So I went to work for the Japanese, and I was, title was controller, but in Japanese system, controller has nothing to do with accounting. It's actually more or less office manager. And I spent 11 years there, and that's where I got my education in pipe. We did OCTG, drill pipe, line pipe, and everything that was a pipe. And I learned all about international trade, documentation, imports, the whole ball of wax. And it's basically where I got my education in pipe. And Pipe Exchange was a Mitsui group company back then. Mitsui had no ownership, but it supported it with consignments and so forth and so on. It was the financial support. And that's how my relationship with Pipe Exchange came. So after 11 years, again, I was, needing to make my last move of what my career was going to be. And the two guys that owned Pipe Exchange, they had another business, actually, which was their primary business. They asked me to come over and run the company. So I came over as a partner in '94, and that's how I came to Pipe Exchange and started that. And then I became a sole owner in December of '98, and took over from there.
Still as a young man.
Yeah, still, but at that part, when you're mid-40s and so forth, you kind of, if you're going to make a move or whatever. I loved the business. I didn't want to get out of the business. And so it gave me the opportunities to stay in it,
And what did Pipe Exchange look like back in 94 to 98, 99?
4 or 5 employees, doing, maybe a couple of million a year. It was very small. I had more experience in OCTG than line pipe, so I depended upon the people there to help, and they did, so we totally revamped the company, quite honestly.
And who were some of those fellow employees?
Yeah, all guys. That's what I love about this business. When we go to NASPD conferences and everything, it's like an incestual deal. All of us worked with each other someplace, somewhere. Jerry Rogers, Wayne Holland, all of those guys, we all worked together. They helped me build Pipe Exchange in the early days.
Jerry Rogers?
Yeah, Jerry was with me for 5 years. Wayne was with me for 5 years, and Kim McMeans and some others came over, and then we just started growing, and then in this business you get ups and downs, and we always had somewhat financial restraints, so they had other opportunities, so they moved on. And then Jeff Crabtree been 20 years with us now. He was I guess my first big sales guy with a lot of experience to come in and stay with me and help me grow this thing. But the big growth with our company, Randy, was with Gerald Murfish and Rochelle Murfish Jacobson.
And tell me about that.
Yeah, and in 2004, the Japanese wanted to get out of the carbon grade business, and I was like a son, so they came to me and said, Dolty, you need to find some other support. And we'll take your time, but and the only thing we ask is that when you do, take this inventory with you, okay? And so 2002 and 3 was not good years. 1999 was a very terrible year, and so Gerald at the time was running TexTube, and Rochelle was running Murfish, and I was one of Gerald's biggest customers at TexTube. And so he had always checked in on me, you happy with your Japanese situation, whatever. So when the time came, I went to Gerald and said, hey, are you really interested? Because, it's like they always say, let's do lunch. It's a polite thing. You don't ever do it, So I went to him and asked him, you always asked about Pipe Exchange, are you serious? And he said, well, yes, I'm serious. He says, meet me at my house tonight. We'll have dinner and talk about it. So we did. The next day he went in, talked to Rochelle, and both of them as individuals, not as Murfish Pipe, invested and became my partners. We redid the partnership.
And this was 2004?
2004.
That was a good year.
April. Well, that's what I'm saying. And it puts some perspective to us. I've always tell all our people, you have to be honest. You have got to work hard. But timing and being at the right place at the right time is such a big factor. And Gerald and Rochelle were comfortable with me because they knew me. I'm a good, honest guy. And so they had no problems putting up the money and investing in the company. And the timing, we bought, remember, I took all the Mitsui inventory. It was about $5 million worth of pipe at an average of about $500 a ton. And 2004 came, 2004, 5, 6, 7, and 8 were the 5 greatest years in the oil patch history. And that pipe just quadrupled. And we were just off and running. And those 5 years just put us on the map.
And you had the help of Gerald and Rochelle.
Yeah, financially. Yeah. Gerald and, they separated from TexTube, and he went back to Murphy's Pipe, and he and Rochelle ran there and grew their business. And we were left here to grow ours. But again, we would have not been able to do that without their financial backing and their trust and their help, by all means. Yeah. And so it gave us the means to really become, at one time in that span there, I have the letter, we were U.S. Steel's largest ERW distributor in the United States of America. And when you take that little
API X grades,
right, and when you take this little company way back then, growing to that, we grew to have several years of around $250 million in sales. But at the time, you got to remember in those things, we had 4 programs: XTO, Chesapeake, and Anadarko. And we supplied their pipe for the lower 48s, and it was hell trying to keep up with it. You always say, what's your worst year? I can tell you financially, the best year was 2008. The hardest year ever in my life in this pipe business was 2008, because it was tough supplying the demand. And, but it is what it is. We were very blessed at the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then how it's changed again.
Yeah.
And tell me about that in the years since, the 08 and et cetera.
Well,
because Gerald and Rochelle,
right. Yeah, business overall, when I was reading the questions deal, it's so changed from, back then till today. It's a totally different animal, completely. In my days, Randy, it was much more of a relationship type business, okay? And, but back in the oil patch, you had these big groups of purchasing. You had the demigod and his generals and the lieutenants, and, these oil companies were stacked with purchasing people. And over the years, that has gone down and down and down and down. So back then, your purchasing director, he had a lot of clout. He made the decisions. Today, that falls more on the engineering and operational side, okay? And so it's a different, and the purchasing people are younger. Their generation's younger. It's tough getting people out to lunch. It's go and play golf, entertaining, whatever, because this generation now, their wives are working, they have kids. When there's free time, it's going to be home, So you don't have as much time to build those relationships as you did back then. It's more clinical now. It's more computerization, sending emails, getting quotes, that kind of stuff. It's still service oriented by all means, and it's still, best price service means a lot. But those two things are supposed to be given anyway. We're all selling from the same mills anyway. We all make API pipe, so it's a matter of who can service it better. But at the end of the day, it has to be price also.
Sure,
yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, and so today that's what it is. It's tough building a relationship because you're not given the opportunity to spend the time. Your relationship is built more by how much can you help that person do their job. Sure. That's what's become the big part of it. Yeah.
I understand. I want to ask you, what are some of the big changes that you've seen in your 40 years in the industry? A lot of people talk about the computerization, of course, and the emails, but can you relate some old stories of?
Well, one of them, you asked about most memorable things and so forth, and it's some things I've always done presentations and to staff people here. What I'll never forget is when I left Mitsui and took over Pipe Exchange. I didn't have a lot of background on the distribution side or line pipe side, but we were doing a lot of business with Tenneco and Mr. Charlie Hall, who was the demigod, the director of purchasing. He was like a rock star in the world. Everybody knew him. And so I had met him because of Mitsui's involvement. And so I asked for an audience, and I went up and saw him one day, and I said, Mr. Charlie, I'm at Pipe Exchange now, and, line pipe, and, I'd like a chance of your business and all that. And that's been one of the keys to my business here. And I will never forget when he looked at me, and he said, Dolty, he says, I've been dealing with these guys 25, 30 years. Why the hell do I need you? And I sat across that desk going, and I said, well, all I can do is just ask for a chance, So I got up and politely and left. And as I walked down the hall, that was the key. What do you do different than anybody else? And that's what I strive for every day. Every day I try to walk into this office and think of a different way of doing things. And so that's been a key to Pipe Exchange. I think a lot of people get our From the All Patch weekly distribution. It goes over 6,000 people around the world twice a week, and it's totally free. But it gives that person on that end something without me just saying, can I inquire. You build a relationship. And that's kind of what we focused on. I don't really need to tell people what we do. They know what we do. I don't need to tell people, I need an order or you give them a gun. We're getting to quote their inquiry. So the thing we tried to focus on, how can I help you? And what we do is do our best of keeping them up to date with the market, supply them with as much data and that's about the thing. I think on the mill side, Randy, when you talk about the biggest change, I think in my early days, most mills were run by second, third, and fourth generation steel brats. Okay. We had this major transition, and all mills now are run by CFO Wall Street guys. And that has been a major change in our industry. You had a guy who used to know what pipe or steel was. Right. Now you have a guy that he's got a quarterly bottom line, Wall Street driven, and it's just a different mentality. Totally. The relationships change, from year to year, quarter to quarter, and the philosophies and, with whatever. And that's been a big, big change.
For those young people out there that are, just getting started in the pipe business, and what advice would you give them, a key piece of advice to help them get started?
Yeah, well, the thing is, don't ever forget your name is your resume. And the old saying, you've got one chance at making a good impression. Your first impression, you ought to value that. Because your first impression, you can maybe overcome it, but it takes a lot of time to be able to do that. And that's what I've always told people. When you're out at a sporting event or a picnic or a nightclub or whatever, you don't know who's there and who's looking. So you need to conduct yourself in a professional manner. And whether you work for Pipe Exchange or any other distributor, that's a little line on your resume. Your reputation is what counts. Yeah. And all these people here, I know it sounds kind of weird, but I've always told all our employees, if you are not being hit on every day, that means you're not making your mark in the industry. It's our job to see to it that we're paying you a good salary, that you have a future, you can provide for your family, and you have a good working atmosphere. That's our burden, to keep you here. But if people aren't after you all the time, that means you aren't making your mark in the industry. It's that simple.
Sure.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what, we try to get everybody to focus on.
Did you have a mentor?
Yeah.
Early on?
Yeah, very much.
Would you like to share?
Yeah, you bet. One of my biggest, again, parents always, my mom, I'm a mom's little boy. I'm the only one left with my mom, and my mom was a very religious person. We're Catholic Christians, and I grew up in that faith. And through all the hard times of losing a dad and my two sisters and whatever, we relied on our faith a lot. And in my darkest day, it's the same thing. My father-in-law, my wife Cece's dad, was a very hard worker and very conservative type guy. And we always thought they made damn good money, but later on in life, when you find out, you're like, wow, how did he manage that, But that's why she's the way she is, she's very conservative and type deal. And then from there, when I went to work, my Sid Tashima, the head guy at Mitsui, who hired me, he was like an elder statesman, and he brought me in, and I learned so much from him because he was a very cold, direct. You knew where you stood at all times. And I'll give you two stories if you don't mind, which was really good. When I first went to work there, it's a culture shock. Here's this old Cajun boy, and I'm with the Japanese, and it's all open concept. And I'm there a couple of weeks, and I know what the hell I'm going to be doing. I knew where the bathroom was, and and where to get pencils and paper and stuff. And so his desk was right next to mine. And one day I got up and I went up to him and I said, Tashima-san, I said, what exactly do you want me to do? And he turned and looked at me. He said, Do-chan. He says, me and the men, we will go sell. You handle all bullshit. And I looked, I turned around, I went back to my desk, and so my big brother, which was like his second in command, Satoru Miura, he came to me and he said, oh, Dolty, don't worry, I'll show you. And what he meant by that was that what they wanted was a Japanese rotational staff every 5 years. They wanted a person to be here all the time, learn. And they didn't really want the American staff answering to a Japanese, particularly the lady staff and so administrative. They wanted them answering to an American, and plus I would be the anchor. So I went through several transitions with guys over the 11 years I was there, and that was basically it. So basically what I did, my responsibility was everything except the actual sale of pipe. And I remember one day, I went to him and I told him, here's another thing that was so good. I went to him and I said, Tashima-san, I would like to go to Midland. I hadn't been there in a while. And he turned to him and he said, no. So I started backing off around and he said, no, Do-chan. He says, you a grown man. You're very talented. If you should know whether you should go to Midland or not. You don't have to ask me. When you come back, let me know, what you did, fine. And he says, but that's your decision. So jokingly, I said, next week I went to Hawaii. No. But, he thought about that. You know what I'm saying? It was just kind of a thing. And he would, every month, he would find something. One day he found a 17-cent error on a contract. And he called me over. And he said, Do-chan, you should value your signature more than this. Yeah. And so I'll never forget.
And what did he call you?
Well, in Japanese, someone older than you always say son, Randy-san. And someone younger is chan, like Do-chan. So yeah, that's like Mr. and whatever. So he always called Do-chan, but it gave you a lot of perspective. You always knew where Mr. Tashima stood because he followed company policy and was always very clear to it. There was no deal. And I remember one day when the Astros, very famously back then, was in the playoffs with the Phillies, I think, or the Mets or whatever. And so it's about 4 o'clock or so, 3 o'clock, and we kind of congregated in the corner listening on the radio. And boy, he stood up and said, Do-chan, no radio. It wasn't 5 o'clock yet, you see. And so he was directly to the rule, but very respected everywhere he went. Because people respected him for that. So my day...
He was your mentor?
Big time. Yeah, and then the other ones on that, quite honestly, is I think of two guys, to be honest with you. Steve Fowler, Lone Star Steel, and Byron Dunn, who's in our Hall of Fame. And the reason for that is we've had a very long relationship with the Lone Star, with Pipe Exchange, starting as a baby. They supported us so much. But it's amazing the job that those guys did with Lone Star, being financially strapped, having mills that were not as productive as the competitors. It's amazing what those two guys accomplished, what I always say, with one arm tied behind their back. Always respected that. And even till today, I have communications with, primarily with Fowler. I mean, there's not a week that goes by that we don't correspond some kind. And when I want to brush something off, I ask him, I'll send it to him. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? And he'll always give me his response, and always valued that a lot, a lot.
That's tremendous.
Yeah.
Good. Fantastic. What I'd like to talk about now, Dolty, is talk a little bit about NASPD.
I love it.
That's where I met you.
Yeah.
Was NASPD. Can you remember the first?
Yes, I do. and that's another thing. Gerald and Rochelle got me to become a member and participate. Okay, because we weren't members at that time, and they were very active, as you know. And so I joined, and Gerald and I.
What year was it?
It had to be 2004. Okay, and I'm not quite sure. I could think about. I'm pretty sure it was St. Louis, and the reason being because Gerald and I went a little early, and we went and make some calls to Jim Barnes and a few other people in St. Louis. And then we went to the deal, and that was my first one. And then, like anything I do, I just like to be part of, so I just got into it. And quite honestly, since then, Randy, I've only missed one conference since then, and that was the one in October, because Cece and I went on a river cruise for our 50th wedding anniversary, and that's the only meeting I've ever missed.
My goodness.
Yeah, and it's just, but it's hard to explain to people the value. It just really is. Because I've belonged to a lot of organizations over the years. This by far is the strongest, by far. Of building relationships, the cost of being a participant compared to others, and it just goes. And what builds a relationship is the ability to have your wife with you, and the wives build relationships, and and stuff like that. I always jokingly, Ray Davila with Axis now, and Patricia, Cece and I, we've built a long-time relationship with those two, and I jokingly tell people all the time when we talk about mill pricing, when I need a good deal, I tell Cece, she calls Patricia tells Ray to give me a cut. It doesn't quite work that way, but it helps. Yeah, but it was just those kind of relationships, and you just do. And then the guys you meet, a lot of the organization are not, API pipe business per se, but it gave me the ability to learn structural, learn pile, learn other types of business than just our little deal, because pipe is more massive than just line pipe, Yeah, and it is, and it's you build a relationship to where it's really neat to be able to pick up a phone and say, "Hey, man, come on, I need this, or help me out here, or whatever," and you do it, because you got that relationship, and that 2 months from now you may call me and I'll help you out. It's just invaluable. You get to see nice places. And
what's one of your favorite?
Oh, I knew, when I read that, and I said, that is easy as heck, and it's maybe fun of you, but Cece and I will tell you right off the bat, Coeur d'Alene.
Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Yeah, and why? Number one, it's different than everybody else. You go into cold cities, Chicago, Houston, Boston, whatever. Coeur d'Alene is, you get out in the beauty of Mother Nature. You're like on a planet by yourself. The whole convention is together. You as a group spending more time together, it's just different than any other place we go to, quite honestly. Yeah. It ought to be the annual convention every year.
You wouldn't get any argument over here.
Yeah, I know. And we've gotten to, Cece and I over the years got to go spend time in cities we probably never would have. You know what I'm saying? So you learn by each one. Yeah.
Now, my notes tell me that you were the NASPD president in 2014 and 15.
Yeah.
Only 5 short years ago. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was. I will never forget. Bill Buckland called me. And Buckland was, again, I guess, head of the nominating committee or whatever. And because Baylor Moore was president at the time, Buckland president before, and I'll never forget the call. And Bill and I both laughed. And he called and he asked me that, would you want to become president? He says, they had nominated or whatever. It's good. And my first words was, F. And he says, well, that's not quite the answer we were hoping, but it shocked me, and it did because I just felt I had not been a member as long as some guys, you know what I'm saying, and all, but, God, you talk about, you've went through that yourself. You talk about put a check on your career, on your whole working career, to be able to say that you were president of an organization that represents what you do, and just tremendously. And so forever you can wear that little tag, and it was really cool. And then the 2 years, I say it very candidly, thank God for Susanna and Gail, they walk you through it, say not go over here, not, over there, thank goodness. But it's just enjoyable by all means.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I love hearing it. Still staying on NASPD, I want to hear a little, you've touched on it a couple of times, but some of the relationships that, you've built, but who were some of the guys that you always were calling the week ahead before a convention? Hey, what are you guys doing Wednesday night? Who are you hanging out with?
Well, Ray and Patricia, with Davila, we always made it that the Wednesday night, us 4 went out and had dinner together, and then over the years we hung around with, Philip and Cherie, Nicholas and Art and Ellen Sheldon and Chuck and Annie King, those primarily more, we kind of just the ladies mesh together, and while we're in committees, they're off going do something and stuff like that. So you kind of always looked forward to it, without a doubt. And then you had things like last time, Korchimer had the deal, that he brought us all together and all. It's just fun. And the thing too, Randy, is my younger days at Mitsui and then my early days at NASPD, you always looked at the guys that had been there longer than you, and you always say like, man, boy, I wish I was there. I wish I had those kind of contacts. I wish I whatever. And then when time passes and you're there, you get to experience what you always wanted to. And it's like, Jerry Rubenstein, and you hear all of those stories, Earl Cohen, and all that. Well, you and I, we've got to go through it now, we got to go through what they went to, got to feel what they feel, and it's really cool. Yeah, you can't beat it. It's really cool.
I love it. Well, we're getting close to the bottom of the sheet. I want to ask you, if you could go back and have the 2020 hindsight, is there anything that you would do different or change anything of your journey along the way?
Yeah, I think the only thing I thought about that, Randy, would be, be a little bit more bold. Though people will think I'm very bold because I have a big mouth, and I talk a lot, but I'm very conservative. And in my early days of being in business, in the early days of that pipe exchange, we didn't have a lot of money, so we had to be very conservative. And even in my financial days, I was very conservative in my borrowing base type things. And so I've always been. And I think if I'd have been a little bit more bold, it would have accelerated the things, but not too much, because I look at that and I stayed out of a lot of trouble by not being bold. because I've seen over the years a lot of people get in trouble because they try to outfox the fox, try to, hit the home runs and so forth and so on, and that part not. Not too much after that. I've been very lucky. Cece is, she by all means has made me what I am because of her conservatism, And one thing I would change, remember to think about that, is I did not do a good job of managing my family life with my working life, okay? And an example I'll give you, years ago when I'm first starting at Mitsui and I'm working there, my daughter, oldest daughter today, she was, I don't know how old, 9, 10. She asked Cece one night, why doesn't Dad come home anymore? And what it was is I left in the morning in the dark and I came back at night in the dark. And so kids would go several days without seeing me. And I was just, again, Cece took care of our home, and which allowed me to do what I had to do to solidify my job. But I did it too much, And so when Cece shared that with me that night, I went, no, this is out of whack, So I needed to adjust that, and so I did. And that's something I wish I would have done a better job, because you can get too involved in this business, and but that's been about it.
Yeah.
I treasure the relationships, that we've made. You can't buy that. Yeah.
But last thing I have, that's not to say that we have to be done, but the last thing on my list, I always like to ask everybody, besides the steel pipe business, besides your career, is there anything else that you would like to share that you're most proud of? A lot of people touch on their kids or their grandkids or something. Some people talk about their charities that they work for. Is there anything other than the pipe business?
Yeah, the family and the kids. Yeah. I've got 6 grandkids all total, and they've just been our life. You get to, when you're like us in this business and you've got your own kids, so much of it is your working career, and so you get to this stage to where you have more time to spend with the grandkids than you did with your own kids. And so you kind of get to relive it. This is where you get to spoil the heck out of them, and stuff like that. That's part of it. I think that's more than anything, quite honestly. We have a bay house in Galveston, and we have a boat and we do a little fishing and stuff like that. But it's mostly with the kids and things like that you get to enjoy that. Our family has a strong faith, and our relationships over time, has been to that. We've lost several good friends to cancer. And things like that, and you go through that with their families and so forth, and so it just builds on that. But just helping as best I can.
Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask you?
No, I think you did a great job, especially sending out the kind of pre-deal on that part. You get to think it through a little bit, and it's a good deal. You get to reminisce. And I tell you, I've told you this before when you first started this. This is a tremendous thing you're doing, tremendously. That's an awesome project, because that is something that all of us will be able to look at forever. And my grandkids will be able to go to the website and look at it. And it's a real neat thing. Yeah, I know you're spending a lot of time, and I understand that, but you should treasure it.
Labor of love.
Yeah, you bet.
Dolty, thank you, sir.
You're welcome, buddy.
I appreciate your time, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. It's a great honor,
Absolutely.
by all means. Great honor.